You're listening to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, aimed at helping photographers learn how to make the leap from amateur to pro. Hello, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, a joint effort brought to you by Photofocus and Skip University. This is Shamira Young, and I'm joined by my co-host and the man with the golden voice, Skip Cohen.
Whoa. Now that's a new one, the golden voice.
It's totally fitting, yes.
All right.
In case you didn't know.
All right. I didn't know. In fact, all of us are the same. We hear our voice and we don't like it. We see our own photographs. We don't like portraits of ourselves. It just seems to go on and on like that. Anyway, we got a great show, everybody. Now, for years, I have talked about the best part of this industry having nothing to do with imaging directly, but the friendships that come out of everyone's love for the craft. Well, this is a kick today because our guest and I go back, I won't tell you how many years, but it's a lot of years, and back to my early days at Hasselblad. Eddie Tapp is in the Mind Your Own Biz house, and Eddie sets the standard for changing with technology and the times. He's an artist, a photographer, an educator, an innovator, a writer, and so many of us in the industry consider him a really good buddy. Now, he was one of the first artists inducted into the Photoshop Hall of Fame, and his specialties over the years have pretty much included just about everything, including underwater photography, and most recently working with and teaching other photographers how to work with drones. So, you know, from land to sea and up in the air, he's covered it all. We're going to talk about his ability to adapt to changes in technology and key things he's seen change over his career, and a little speculation maybe about what's coming next. So, buddy, if I haven't screwed up technology, which I say this almost every time, welcome to Mind Your Own Business.
Well, thank you, Skip and Shamira. What an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be here. I'm always excited to talk with you and what you're doing and reminisce about the times we've had in the past. And
boy, we have had some times, too.
We have.
Eddie, we are thrilled to have you on the show, and if the pre-interview banter that we had is any indication of how this episode is going to go, this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I'm glad you think that, because we're counting on you to drive the bus, and if you leave it up to me and Eddie, there will be no control.
Oh, I have to keep things under control. The history between you two is amazing. Well, Eddie, let's kick it off with our favorite first question. For those listening who may not know about you, for those who are living under a rock somewhere, can you tell us about your background journey, how you got started, and how you ended up doing what you're doing today?
In a short sentence here, I fell in love with photography when I was 7 years old, but I didn't know it. And I didn't know that until maybe 10 or 12 years ago, exactly tracing back. But in high school, I started a photography club, and it was fun. And after I got out of high school and graduated from college, which I studied fashion photography in college, I actually bought a studio from this photographer who came down from Chicago, and he was very old, and he taught me how to do negative retouching. And that was back in the days, that was about 1973. And if you can imagine, some of you probably will not understand this, but I was shooting a split 5x7 portrait camera with a 305 millimeter Kodak Ektar lens and a Graflex cameras with flash bulbs. Of course, I had my Hasselblad too. That's what I brought into the business, but I acquired all of this in a 3.5 gallon dip and dunk processing line. So that goes way back. It kind of shows you how ingrained I was in photography with film. And actually, I'm going to throw this in. You know, I used to play in a band. As a matter of fact, I played for 2 weeks for the grand opening of Disney World in Florida. And that was so exciting. I tried to talk my band into getting on the circuit because the other band that was playing when we weren't, they were doing like Fort Lauderdale and the Bahamas. And it's like, hey, guys, we could make a living doing this. Let's go. Nobody was interested, so I said, you know what, I'm going to open a studio, and I did, and I became one of the 2 photographers in Atlanta to get your band pictures made with. So I've photographed literally hundreds of entertainers back then, and it was so much fun. And then there was a time where I went on tour with a band called Kansas. And I did 6 or 8 dates with them. I did a whole week of rehearsal in Dallas. And I'll tell you something. I came up with a great idea, an innovative idea. I couldn't wait to get into it, of creating music videos. And guess what? MTV came out about right then, and somebody had stole my idea.
Darn it.
It was like, what? That was my idea. So I just kept rolling and rolling. And then in the early 90s, well, actually, it was in the 80s. No, let's go back to the 90s. In the early 90s, probably 1993, I started shooting with a digital camera. It was a JVC analog to digital signal, and it took about 7 minutes to do an exposure. But back then, I was doing the covers for a used camera company, the color covers of their monthly magazine. So everything I photographed were cameras. And I have a link I could share with you at some point where I've got all these camera covers and inside shots of all the cameras. And some of those were done with that JVC camera. Of course, later on in time, the Kodak camera came out, and also the Foveon. But it was a lot of fun jumping into the digital arena before most people. And I became actually somewhat of a pre-press person in regards to converting digital files for the printing press. So
wow,
that led to a lot of other things in the industry for me. Back then, in the mid-90s, I became the digital committee chairman for the Professional Photographers of America. And my team, we just said, look, nobody knows what's going on here. Let's just bring in the best in the world. And we did. We brought in Katrine Eisman and Lee Veras and just a whole list of people that were digitally working back then. And we brought that to the platform. And it's so exciting what we did. Joe Glida was on the team. We came up with something called the Digital Cafe. We also came up with a computer lab that was in the trade show. And I'll never forget calling Adobe, asking them if they would furnish these 20 computers with Photoshop. And I'll never forget the question that this person asked me, and it was, why would a photographer want to use Photoshop? And it's like, well, let me tell you.
Wow.
So it was just, it's kind of probably a little too much for the answer, but just kind of rolled off my mind here for a second.
That's quite the journey.
It has been, yes. It's been fun. It's been rewarding. It's been exciting. It's been stressful. All those things.
There's something you said in there that for our listeners, especially newer photographers coming into the industry, always be careful about what you say about anybody to anybody. Not that you have to walk around and watch your step, but Eddie threw out some names there. Now, Katrine Eisman, I met when she was a senior at RIT. I was at Hasselblad, and she actually won a contest that we did. We had students from RIT and students from Brooks, and they were all given Hasselblad gear on loan. I believe it was for 30 or 60 days, and they had to create an image, and Katrine won. So there's a connection, and you heard Eddie mention Katrine. Lee Veras is married to Bobby Lane. Lee is a phenomenal artist. I catch up to Bobby and Lee all the time. They've got friends here in Sarasota and have stayed at our home. Joe Glida still holds the record for the one joke that makes me laugh every single time that I cannot repeat. I can't even get the joke out to tell it to my wife. And my only point is, this is a very, very small industry. It may seem huge when you go to your first convention, but it's sort of like that game of 3 Degrees of Separation with Kevin Bacon, where we all can find a common denominator, and we laugh about it because usually everybody can trace something back to Tony Corbell, and that's the Kevin Bacon equivalent. But it's a very small industry, so just remember that whoever you're talking to, odds are, if they've been around the industry for a few years, they've got some good roots. And just be careful if you're unhappy with something. I have seen careers go up in smoke because somebody decided to slam somebody and didn't realize who they were talking to. And that's really way off base. And I didn't mean to make it so long. And for everybody listening, Shamara may edit part of that down. Eddie, I mentioned in the beginning that your signature is sort of, knowing when to change. What are some of the things that you think about when you start seeing something new on the horizon? I mean, you're definitely an early adopter early on in terms of picking up new technologies, but then there's a point where all of a sudden you're ready to go public. What are the things that have hit you over the years as all these changes were going on around us?
Skip, I have to look at the core of that, and I fell in love with photography and knew it when I was in high school, and that love has not ceased at all. It's just grown and grown. So when something new would kind of hit the horizon, it's like, okay, it piques my interest. Back in the 80s when they introduced the Macintosh, I looked at the paint program and the draw program, and I designed a complete, incredible studio with those programs. I thought, they made this thing for me. And I was really almost surprised when I noticed that other people were using that little Mac with those programs. It just blew me away. And that happens to me frequently. I'll see something, I say, well, that fits my glove like perfect. And I think I'm answering your question, but the core of that is just loving it. And I love photography. When I decided to do it for a living, when I was in high school, I did not care what part of photography I would fall into. I just loved it, and I wanted to become part of it. I tried to join the Navy because back during that day, it was, things were happening. And, sir, what do you want to do? I want to be a photographer. I want to work in the lab, whatever. And when my test came back, they said that I qualified for a dental assistant. And I thought, creating x-rays was not exactly my idea. So I unfortunately got a 4F in the draft because of hernia, but so I was never able to get into the service, which I wish I had been able to. But as far as photography is concerned, the evolution of all the changes, I grew up in PPFA, the Professional Photographers of America. My first convention that I went to was in 1973 or 74. It was in Anaheim, California. And I spent some time with Peter Galvin on the beach, and also a fashion photographer at 20th Century Fox Studios. Just loving every minute. And my business was okay. It was good. I was doing catalogs and fashion work, and I did weddings back in the 70s, by the way. And but as things evolved, when I switched into the digital thing, it was a whole new concept. Color management came into the picture. So I reach out as far as I can with what I'm doing. And the one thing I loved about my business always was I was doing something different every day. In the darkroom at this point, in the studio here, calling on the phone, making business here, going to conventions, making friends. I mean, the diversity of this business of photography as a business was what attracted me more than not. And then to do everything from aerials to underwater, to land. I love your description, Skip, land, sea, and air.
You've covered them all.
Well, if you get me in space, I'd take pictures up there too.
Do you know that you're the only person I know, and I'm sure there are other people out there, but you're the only person I know that knew so much or had such a good vision of what he wanted to do that you've still got the receipt from that first Hasselblad you bought for $500.
I do.
So, yeah.
Yes, that is a treasure.
Right out of high school.
Yes, and I just remember the bus ride to get to that camera store. And yeah, no, it's very special to me. So photographers are notorious for being hoarders of stuff, and I am so guilty of that. And that's true because I've been cleaning up my office here, and I have come across so many things that have stopped me in my tracks and brought tears to my eyes. Just notes from friends and workshops that I've taught, and pictures that I see of the really good times. It's been a terrific ride these past multiple decades, I should say.
Well, here's the best part. It's still going forward.
It is.
So,
I think some of the best is yet to come. Skip?
Do you have a favorite specialty with everything that you've done over the years, Eddie? Do you have a favorite specialty that you're doing today? And can you tell us why?
I wish I could say yes, it would be lifestyle photography, or yes, it would be creating scenics, or yes, it would be portraits or whatever. I just don't know. My favorite thing is what I'm doing next. That's not a cop out. It's the truth. I love what I do, and I used to love doing catalog work, and that I wouldn't care for today, just because I used to do it, and it was good. It was challenging. It was successful, and I probably shouldn't say that. I wouldn't turn down a catalog if you brought one to me, but what I love doing is what I've been doing the past 10 years, and just creating compositions. And I'll never forget, I have to say this one story. Been to Hawaii many times, teaching and giving seminars and whatever, but the Hawaii PPA brought me to do a presentation, must have been 20 years ago. And the person that brought me to this convention took me out just on special shooting, and all I had with me was a point and shoot digital camera that Fuji had just come out with. So I was just testing it. And what I discovered about that particular day was creating compositional elements in my camera, because looking at this little point and shoot camera, it was different from, the DSLR, if you will. And I fell in love with compositional elements there. And hey, I didn't start to see light until after I graduated from college, and I was well into my career as a photographer. And I'll never forget the day that I saw light for the first time, and saw it as a spiritual thing, and as all of a sudden specular highlights and diffused highlights were like, what? They've been there the whole time. I've seen them, I studied it, I knew about them, but I never felt them like I did that day that I saw light for the first time. So I have those types of feelings every now and then, and that keeps me intact with loving photography, I guess. So it never ends. And hey, I'm still learning about photography, and I love to learn.
I want to switch gears just for a second and go in a direction that I guess I take us in a lot of these podcasts. One of the things that again, it's your signature, is relationship building. Scuba, you work closely with one of the best underwater photographers in the world, Stephen Frink, who's down in the Keys. Photoshop, when you started teaching, one of those very first videos I mentioned that I had seen was you and Dean Collins had put together. Those relationships throughout your career have been really important, because not only do you watch other people's backs, but it creates that relationship where we all watch each other's backs. And just talk for a second about relationship building and how you've gone about it, because it just seems to be something that comes very natural to you, as opposed to some people that really have to work at it.
Gosh, Skip, I'm a compassionate person. I love people. I respect people. I respect all people. And to be associated with other photographers like Stephen Frank is just a tremendous honor, I think. And you, by the way, young man.
Well,
but
thank you, especially for the young man part, because we're about the same age, so I'll take all the young mans I can get.
I heard that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think liking the person is the most important thing, or becoming someone that like in the commercial world, the business comes from somebody that likes you. I think building a relationship with clients and your friends is just a part of this industry. And there's a lot of good people in our industry, as you know. And I just love being around those people and working with them and learning from them.
Well, along with learning from them, let's switch gears on everybody again. I mean, I know that one of the latest programs that I've seen you doing over the last year or so has been workshops to help photographers understand drone photography. Let's go right into some of the specifics that people have to be aware of, because it's become a lot more complicated than just putting it in the air and pushing a button.
Well, exactly that. A photographer is going to learn, and create light, composition, and exposure. When you have a camera in your hand, it's all about your subject and the light and the background and making those three things gel. So when you get up in the air, you have telemetry to deal with. And early on, just that element, you almost forget about light, composition, and exposure or background, because you've got wind, you got velocity of speeds and direction and obstacles and airspace. There's a lot of things to tend to with flying a drone. And for safety's number one. So my first years, 3 or 4 years of flying drone was all practice. I'm practicing getting in position, finding the right location, because we don't see from the air. You have to get up there to see the shot. And once you see the shot, then you want to refine it. And that's what makes a lot of us different, is that refinement element. So you find the shot, you refine it, you shoot it. So just learning the aspects of flying a drone, which, by the way, is not at all difficult, especially because of the GPS connections today. There's a lot of safety to it. So if you get up in the air and you freak out, you just let go, and the drone will hover wherever it is. So, but having an idea of what you want to get in the air first helps. But I think if you want to do the drone photography, which everybody should be doing, as a matter of fact, there are right now there are 2 million drones in our country, and that's predicted to go to 2.5 million drones in just 2 or 3 years from now. But those of us that use it for imaging and professionally, it requires just a little bit of study. As a matter of fact, if you want to do this as a professional photographer, then you have to become certified with the FAA. And that is a test that you have to take. You have to study for it. You have to study the airspace and weather, and just the same thing actual pilots have to study for, but on a not quite so much on that level. But it is, in fact, the same charts that you have to study, the same weather information, but you have to respect the airspace and go by the rules. And it's pretty easy to do today, especially with the application on the phone. that I use an application called Air Map. When you go to Air Map, it sees where you are. It shows you if there's any activity around you. We had the president in town Friday, and there were TFRs all over the place, temporary flight restrictions. So I could see when he was in town, it was red. When he left, it went away, But there's certain restrictions. You can't fly, and that would be one of them, or sporting event or hospital or school, that sort of thing. But it's a lot of fun being able to do that and creating compositions and art from the air. It's just an extension of a photographer. I love it. I love being able to do it. I taught a workshop at the Georgia School a couple of years ago now, and we just not only had a blast, my assistant made arrangements for certain locations, and one of those was an actual castle, which is being built. It's under construction, but we still use that for a fun drone experience. Well, I should say a drone experience, because we had a couple of issues with a couple of the drones, but that's a part of drone life, is having a few issues. But it's just fun, and when you do get used to it, when you do get into the air, and you're now creating those compositions, and you're looking for the light, you're waiting. I'd sometimes go up and create a composition and say, this is going to be fantastic at 5 o'clock. So I'll go back up at 5 o'clock. I know where to go. I'm just waiting on the light to get right and that sort of thing. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot of fun to it. And I love it. It's just another extension. And I could fly all day if I had enough batteries.
Eddie,
I love it.
It's so interesting hearing about your journey and how you're so comfortable with the way that technology has changed over the decades. And so my next question for you might be a little tough, especially with all of your experience and the skills that you've acquired. But I'm curious, is there an overall lesson that you've learned over the years from where you started to where you are today? Anything that stands out to you?
The overall lesson, oh gosh.
It's a loaded question.
That's a loaded question. If I were to close my eyes and think about the lump sum of your question, I have to throw composition out as the single most important thing, because composition has impact. The composition has mood. Composition includes all the elements: light, mechanical, exposure, element structure, feeling, eye flow. All those things come into composition. So composition to me is the groundhold of what I do, and actually what we do, because it's a composition that draws me in first. Give me a composition, I'll go into it, and then I'll discover what's there. And that's I didn't know it so much until you just asked me that. So that's
well, it ties it all together. That's an amazing answer.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So I guess the big question would be, if you looked into your crystal ball, where's the industry going next?
I'm just going to say, what's old is now new. And I think in some respects, you're going to see a resurgence in some of the business aspects, especially with the way things are going in the world today. I also think that imaging is going to become easier, but I can also tell you that with all of this coming, and what is coming, what is going to accelerate more than anything is the ability to see your work on paper. And that's where the truth comes out. When you see your work printed, all of a sudden you see, oh, that phenomenal image I created on my phone, it isn't the quality I thought it was. It could be, it doesn't matter to me what your equipment is, but it does matter to me what the quality that equipment makes. And you control that with light and exposure. So I see high resolution imaging becoming easier and faster. And I see the print as being the single most important thing about the work that you do, that we do, because that tells the truth. And in saying that, Skip, I'll just mention that as an assignment, I took some very low resolution images from a very famous entertainer organization. And I processed those images for them to be printed large. And in Las Vegas, there's 6 images that are 11 feet tall from a file that had the 6 images in a 58 megabyte file. And there's another image that's printed that's 29 feet wide. I think it's 29 feet wide. And if you walk up to it, guess what you see? You see whatever you see, but at a proper viewing distance, it's beautiful. They held up. So, boy, I'm relating this back to pixel quality, I guess, because back in the 90s, for me, I came up with a sharpening test in Lightroom, very simple, in Photoshop, a very simple sharpening test to determine the quality of a digital camera. And if it stood up to that test, boom, it was good. It was great. Of course, it's only gotten better. Quality's only gotten better since then, but I think I've answered your question at multiple levels there.
So, Eddie, do you have any advice for any photographers who are listening who are just starting out?
Well, there's a lot of advice I might have for somebody starting out, but maybe the one key thing is to just see if you really fall in love with it. If you fall in love with photography, then I think you'll find your place in it pretty easily. With so much on the web today, it's easy to find a style that of another photographer that you like, and you want to. The advice I would have there would be to come up with the different photographers that really impress you and study their work. Learn from their style and develop your own style, because once you have your own style, you know it, and that's what you really fall in love with, is the style that you've been able to develop. So I'll go with style today as that answer, and tomorrow it would be a different answer, but develop your own style.
Well, that's great advice, and the perfect way to close this interview. So much fantastic advice that you gave us, Eddie. And we want to make sure and ask, where should people check you out online for any new projects that you might have coming up?
Well, thank you. I have a website. It's eddietapp.com, EDDIETAPP. And I'm a sole operator here. I am in charge of my website, so I do everything in it, which means I'm also in charge of everything else that I do.
So, including answering your own phone.
Answer my own phone. So I will update my blog, which is on my website. There's a blog tab. I'll put something new and fresh there, once every couple of months or once a month, sometimes a couple of times a month. But yes, and I have some exciting things coming up that the blog will reveal in a few months. So thank you for that. And also, my website has a lot of hidden features, and If anybody wants to get in touch with me through my website and ask me to send them a link to see all the cameras I used to photograph. I've got a hidden page that has hundreds of pictures of those cameras that I used to do the covers for. And I love that because it's all kinds of cameras, old, new, whatever, or new for then, but it's just passion again. So you can easily see where I went from creating digital camera cutouts to creating art with that technology back then. So eddietapp.com, EDDIETAPP is how to get there.
Perfect.
Thank you.
We'll make sure to include that in the show notes as well. The blog post for this podcast so people can check you out. And Skip, I always want to make sure and ask, where can folks find you?
It never changes. It's Skip Cohen on Twitter and Skip Cohen on Facebook, and everything I write every day, which lately seems to be growing, is skipcohenuniversity.com. And you'll also find a lot of content lately over at platypod.com from both me and Shamira, because we're both working with Platypod. And Shamira, where are they going to go to find you?
Folks can hunt me down via email at shamira@photofocus.com. That's my first name, CHAMIRA @photofocus.com. Please send your questions, your ideas, your feedback. We love getting that stuff. And we love getting feedback from our listeners because it shapes how we move forward with the show and the amazing guests that we have on the show. And speaking of amazing guests, Eddie, thank you again. We really appreciate you just chatting with us.
You shared a lot of really good insight.
Oh, guys, thank you. What an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. And anytime Skip says, "Would you do this?" It's like, are you kidding me? give me the microphone.
Yeah, but we're gonna bill you for this one because you shared a lot of good information. So we'll send you an invoice.
And we want to thank our listeners for joining us as well. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Spread the word, especially if they have the burning desire to take their photography business up to the next level. We look forward to having you with us next time on Mind Your Own Business, brought to you by Photofocus and Skip Cohen University.